perfect timing.
Would like to call the meeting of the Guthrie Planning Commission to order. And can we do roll call?
Don McBride, absent. Jill Oaks-Taunce, absent. Joe Chappell. Here. Abe Gassenpour.
Here.
And Chris Bryant.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum.
All right, any public comments submitted to us?
Did not receive any.
Okay. The next item is approval of previous minutes from the August 13, 2020 regular meeting and the August 20th, 2020 special meeting. Is there a motion for the minutes?
I'll make a motion to approve.
I'll second. Could I do both of them? I
Is
was
this
not
for
here.
both?
This is in
Okay.
August?
Yeah,
Yeah, this is for both.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
and I think we were both here, right?
yeah. All right, so Joe Chappell,
Yes.
Abe Gassenpour,
Yes.
and Chris Bryant.
Yes.
All right, those are approved.
Okay, our next item is PC application 20-006. Discussion and potential action on a request for an amendment to the City of Guthrie Code of Ordinances, amending Chapter 16, Planning and Zoning, Article 2, Zoning, Section 1615, adoption by reference, by amending and updating all articles of the City of Guthrie zoning code. The amendment will also repeal the existing mobile home and recreation vehicle parks, signs, and awnings, landscaping and telecommunications facilities regulations in their entirety, and will update and incorporate all requirements within the updated zoning code. Staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just as indicated, this is the meeting in which I had advertised the zoning code or the updated zoning code for a possible action by the Planning Commission for a recommendation, and then we can move it forward to start the same process with the City Council. To date, there were really just a couple things from my understanding, and obviously there's opportunity tonight from any of you to go over any other stuff, but up until now, we were looking at raising the residential zoning districts from 33 and 35 feet to 40 feet across the board. And then also was the elimination of a 100-foot or an ability for a 100-foot sign for any commercial development along I-5, and I think it was for 5 acres or more. But anyway, that was taken out of there. That was essentially most of the comments that were of any change or desire to have changed as we went through. One of the things that I'll go over right now that we kind of added, or I added towards the end in that and have discussion tonight, is we had previously discussed adding accessory dwelling units or accessory living quarters. I changed it to dwelling units because essentially whether it's a living quarter or dwelling unit, whether it has a kitchen or no kitchen, is somewhat irrelevant from a land use standpoint, because if people are living in there, whether it's somebody that's unrelated or a family member, really isn't much different from a land use perspective. But also, as having it as an actual accessory dwelling unit, I think it adds for some diversity of housing options within our community. So that was really the only change there. But there was discussion to look at a possibility of adding accessory commercial units, much like the accessory dwelling units. They would be an accessory use, but it would be for more of a commercial type activity. It would be could be allowed in a residential property. One of the things that, and I'll go over each of these, but one of the considerations with the accessory commercial units was location in areas where it would probably work best or have what we would call the most walkability. In our Guthrie proper area, as well as even the historic district, we have what's called, your traditional subdivision type development, where you have alleys, you have tree-lined streets, you have sidewalks, narrow rights-of-way. It adds or is very conducive to walkability. So one of the things would be is that the accessory commercial units would be limited to those areas. Because once again, somewhere out in the south part of town on large acreages, or even in some more of the modern subdivisions, it may not be as conducive or work as well, because again, the walkability is not there, and you just don't have literally the foot traffic. So the location or the areas in town that it could be in or within those two areas. It also works well that those areas are the most or the closest to in and around the downtown area as well. So again, it kind of works well. The first thing would be is, unlike the accessory dwelling unit, an accessory commercial unit would be only allowed through a special use permit. So it wouldn't be outright allowed by code. It would have a review process, which the special use permit is to the Planning Commission for recommendation and the City Council for final approval. One of the things when I was looking at this, it is not something that's most common really anywhere in the country for that matter at this point. It's some new concepts and ideas that back in the day was probably more prevalent, you know, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s even for that matter, and more communities and even publications, if you want to say, or planning stuff is looking at it. So it was one of those things where you just couldn't Google it and have a bunch of requirements and say that fits to us. So what I tried to do is take the concept and the idea and put some parameters around it to where it would obviously allow the use and not make it too bureaucratic or regulatory, but at the same time not have a negative impact to a neighborhood or potential for the neighborhood. So one of the things that I had in there was location basically would be determined by a special use permit. Once again, I think putting it that it's strictly in the backyard or strictly in a certain area may not always work and be conducive for that particular property or that area in that. And again, I think as zoning and government, a lot of times we try to get too regulatory in that and kind of push things into a corner to where it makes it difficult to work. Now, one of the things that I had, and actually this is on a street that's not too far from where I live, and I wanted to kind of use it as an example because they're not running a commercial operation out of it, but it's a developed property, and I always don't want to basically put a property on
TV?
Yeah, TV per se, you know, all of a sudden, but this is over near Walnut and Warner. And the reason I say location and by special use permit is this is an example of what I, if you want to say, had envisioned would potentially be an option for somebody citing an accessory commercial unit. The house, the primary house is located on the opposite street. It's actually on Warner. But on the side street, which this is for that particular house, they have an existing detached garage and also like an accessory, basically be like an accessory unit or even an accessory dwelling unit type thing or a little shop. And to me, this is a perfect example of how sometimes, even if it's in a backyard or what would be perceived as the backyard, it may work or be more conducive to be on a side street, and that for, you know, just the general, if you want to say, ability to function, get to, and all that. But I thought it was a perfect example of what could potentially happen on a commercial property with a street that has a little bit higher traffic in that. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of show you that because that's...
On a northeast corner?
This
Walnut.
Yeah, it's right at Walnut and Warner.
Northeast corner.
Yeah, it's a block off from Noble. Yeah. And there's probably other...
It's the north, it's the southwest.
Southwest, yeah, it'd be the southwest corner. Yeah, there.
Oh.
But it's kind of an example of, you know, I guess what could be envisioned as potentially for like an accessory commercial
This
unit.
is a half a block off Noble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where
I see what
it, if you want to say still keeps character of the neighborhood, it still keeps character of the residential lot. But again, it, you know, to strictly say it has to be, you know, in a backyard or a certain setback or whatever, you know, I'm not sure. But again, that's for discussion. Because that's what I had included in there is that location, including setbacks, would be based on, or would be approved through a special use permit. The rest of the bulk standards, such as lot coverage, building height, and all that, would be per the respective zoning district. So it kind of goes back to where if you don't have enough room on the property, lot coverage wise, too many accessory structures already, whatever the case may be, obviously you're not going to be able to have that. It would be limited to one accessory commercial unit per property, just like an accessory dwelling unit. And just like we did with the accessory dwelling units, it would not count towards the 2 that are allowed in that. However, there are stipulations put in there that if somebody did have an accessory dwelling unit and at some point wanted to convert it to an accessory commercial unit, they could do so through the special use permit process. In there was also specified uses to give an idea of what is expected or what would or would not be allowed for these accessory commercial units. Because once again, it's uses that would be convenient to a residential area or residents within those areas in that. So what I had specified was like craft, if you want to say related type thing. So if somebody was, did woodworking as a hobby and wanted to have it also to where they could sell those woodworking pieces, or they did wreaths, or they bake pies, or whatever the case may be, more like even a farmer's market thing where they had a garden and they wanted a place to sell the vegetables and all that. That's really what it's trying to achieve and get at in that, more so than some of the other uses. You're not going to be able to have an automotive repair. You can't have manufacturing. You can't have a true restaurant or even manufacturing, that type of thing. Again, it's products and services that would be typical of a neighborhood commercial type use.
Antiques?
Antiques, yeah, that would be allowed, kind of retail in that. But also because like everything, like we've talked with land use tables and things like that, you can never probably get every instance that may come about in terms of what somebody wants to do or may do. So there's a provision in there that basically says generally this is what's expected or the uses that are allowed. However, if you don't have one listed through the special use permit process, it can be determined for similar type uses or intensity of uses. So again, we don't have to have an all-encompassing or limiting aspect to that. One of the things that I did put in there is that the hours would be limited to 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. So we don't have the maybe an issue of somebody having if you want to say a little convenience store type thing and want to be open 24/7. Because again, that may not be the best for a neighborhood area to have even foot traffic and other stuff. Plus, once you get to a certain point, there's going to be probably lights and other stuff that would be on that become nuisance. So the hours would be limited. Signage would be another limitation. Essentially, it would be slightly more than what you would get for a home occupation. In there, I put basically a 4 square foot sign. So it'd be like a 2 foot by 2 foot sign. You could have one in the yard and then one on the actual building itself in that. The idea was to have a sign that would be similar to maybe your typical real estate sign. It was mentioned, I think, in conversations I had where even on Noble, there's a sign that says homemade honey or local honey. It's something to that extent where, there's enough to say, oh, there's something not going there, but it's obviously not going to be a huge impact to the neighborhood where we got a lot of signs and lights in that. So that was the extent of that. In that, again, tried to encompass enough in there to have it understood what the intent was, but again, not get too regulatory to where, you get to the point where, yeah, it's in the code, but it makes it almost impossible to, for the average person to implement. if anybody reads anything about accessory dwelling units, that's one of the big things that is talked about, is a lot of communities require or allow it. But given the stipulations and the amount of regulations, it basically, negates the most people from even going down that road, because there's just too much associated additional park. What?
Like what?
Some of them will require additional parking for that accessory dwelling unit. Again, there are certain, siting locations and even like a special use permit. Now, for an accessory dwelling unit, I think special use permit may be a little excessive. For a commercial one, to me, it's a completely different use and is more justified. But those are some of the things that normally are put in place and again, become somewhat of a barrier to the average person, wanting to do it or the ability to do it. So, having said that, not only can we discuss those two elements, but as I said, the table's open for anything that's within the updated zoning code that you still would want to talk about, have changed or whatever, because again, I'm hoping we can get a recommendation so we can move this forward and again, work towards actually getting the code in place.
And I guess just like any special use permit, anyone within 300 feet is notified.
That is correct. Yeah, and again, I think it's important that it would have a special use permit, because again, unlike an accessory dwelling unit, every property or that is not only different, but is the same thing, may not be conducive for that. And obviously that's why you have special use permits with certain uses in certain areas, because it's not always absolutely clear, because in some cases it may work perfectly in one area, but in another it may not. And so the special use permit allows a twofold approach. Number one, to have that discussion on whether it's appropriate, and as you indicated, you get the public involved with notification as well as the commission and the council. But on the second part of it, it allows for conditions to be placed. So even in general, if you have something, a special use permit would allow conditions. So if it's like, okay, we're comfortable, but there's a couple things, it can be conditioned in that to hopefully eliminate or take care of maybe a couple of the issues. So like I said, some of those uses work very well with a special use permit process.
In this other section too, where we have in-home
Yes.
Home occupations.
Yes.
occupations, is that something that we've had before, or is that all new?
It's, the separate section is new, however, home occupations have existed. But the only thing that they exist currently in our zoning code is a definition. There are no other outlying standards in that. In our definition, it roughly states what a home occupation should be and lists specifically, I think, 4 or 5 that are not to be a home occupation, like dog grooming and, medical or whatever. But that's all that exists in our code. What I have proposed kind of is typical of what a lot of codes have, where, it gives a little bit better idea of what's expected, to where, your home occupation should not create any more traffic than what is, if you want to say, typical in a residential area. A lot of codes will say maybe one appointment, for instance, if you're a tax service or that, maybe one, customer per hour, or one appointment per hour, or those type of things. So it adds a little bit more verbiage, so there's a clear understanding of not only what is to be a home occupation, but if there's a not a specified prohibition on one, but they want to do it, as long as it meets the certain criteria, again, to not have too intensive an impact, you can go ahead and do it. One of the examples I use is when you have a perpetual garage sale. somebody wants to have a garage sale Friday, Saturday, Sunday. That's not a home occupation. That becomes more of a retail business. And a retail business is not really what the home occupation was set for, because it brings customers at any given time to a home. It adds traffic to a neighborhood, that type of thing. But again, a lot of the home occupations you see will be an accountant, a tax service, or those where they may only have one customer per hour, maybe two per hour, and it's by appointment only. They don't generally have.
But the accessory commercial building might do that.
Yes, and that's why I said that's why it would be a separate unit in that, to where it would take it from a out of a home occupation standpoint, but not yet get you to that true commercial, in the downtown or commercial area building. So it would be acting more as a commercial use, hence its name, and have a separate building, and would have more people, a lot of them probably walking more so than driving, but it would have more of that aspect in that than a home occupation. But again, that's why you would have the special use permit, where a home occupation is allowed by code as long as you meet the certain criteria. And as I mentioned, it's obviously something that, is fairly new in a lot of aspects to not only here, but in a lot of cities. If the comfort level isn't there for the commission, or even the council for that matter, that's fine. It isn't going to be I guess for lack of a better word, lost to the code. It's just, again, looking at ways in which we can try to, bridge some of the gaps. It's just like when you're looking at housing, from, like I said, with an accessory dwelling unit, it allows more options for housing on a property where somebody maybe can't afford a 2-bedroom apartment, and they definitely can't afford maybe a larger home, but they may be able to afford living in an accessory dwelling unit, because it's essentially like a studio in that. And so, the accessory commercial unit and some of those things are the same thing, just trying to add some availability and options that could possibly be, down the road for, for people.
Any comments, discussion on?
I don't know, I'm just a little gun shy on this thing. I just am. I get maybe the in-home deals, but, and this is going to make that more likely, isn't it? But just by having this in the ordinance, in-home occupation?
No, not really, because like I said, that exists in the code. It's just, again, not as, if you want to say, elaborate, or not as defined, I guess, in terms of its separate section. But our code allows for home occupations, and again, it just has it as a definition. What I did is just added more wording, I guess, verbiage in that, just to better clarify and understand what the intent of a home occupation is in that. But it's something that exists, and we have people who have home occupations, throughout the community in that. So it's not that is not a new concept. It's just some added verbiage in its own section.
Abe, any thoughts?
Well, some of the stuff in here, this commercial use, to me, is really not defined. Just in the home occupation part of it is still, we got to be careful. People buy homes to have a peace and quiet, to be in a safe neighborhood, and even apply a special use for certain areas there. It could really make a difference in neighborhoods.
No, you have a valid point, and you're exactly right with a lot of that is, somebody wants to buy in a single family area, they expect somewhat single-family uses. You know, it's just like when, you know, you have introduction of some multifamily or larger apartment complexes in single-family areas, there's concerns on what that livability will do in that. And you're not wrong in the sense of introducing more commercial uses to those areas can be uncertain and scary. And you know, like I said, it may be something that at this point we, you know, may not include, and then at a later date, if, you know, the community or other aspects come along to where it might be something, you know, we could look at a later date in that. But, you know, and it's one of those things where there's no right or wrong answer, obviously. It is more of what we want as a community in a comfort level of how our neighborhoods are going to be developed and uses in those neighborhoods are going to happen in that. So, again, as I said, if there's some uncertainty and concern with that, then, you know, we can exclude it at this point and maybe look at it at a later date.
I just like some more information on it. I have a concern too about just limiting it to one part of our community, which is the most historic part of our community. Right?
Yeah.
I think it's, you know, and I know, I admire Chris greatly, and I know his feelings on strong cities. I just know, you know, I don't want to open up a hornet's nest. I think a lot of people that buy a historic home, if they found out that their neighbor is going to put in a commercial building, even if it's architecturally
compatible.
appropriate,
Yeah.
it's not going to be as what is it? It's not going to be. It's going to be more invasive than a home business. Do you need me? Microphone, please. It's not going to be as, you know, the home business is limited to 1 car an hour. Some of these,
Yes.
you know, they could have 5 or 6 cars show up
Yes.
at one time.
At any given time.
At
Yes.
any given
Yes,
time.
that is correct.
And I know that in the past, just when we had that the antique store that went to the old fire station, it seemed like a perfect place for something like that to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And we had several people there
Yes.
that were quite
Concerned.
I would, you know, I'd like to take a day trip to a place that had done it, you know, honestly, just to see. As far as the in-house stuff, I've got no problem with that. I think that's.
Would this, is the local honey example, is that allowed under the current or proposed code without an accessory commercial unit?
Yeah, because, you know, again, when we look at home occupations and that, even though that's, you know, if you want to say more of your, probably considered a retail type thing in that, because they're making it, you know, in their house and it's a limited, if you want to say production, I guess, for better, you know, basically the intensity of that use is still conducive of a home occupation in that. And that's really what comes about when you have a home occupation. You really have to look at that intensity of use and what it's doing. You know, the same thing even like deliveries. If you have a home occupation and you have, you know, UPS and FedEx showing up at 2 or 3 times a day, every day, and, you know, boxes, that's probably not a home occupation. You know, and the same thing we were talking with, you know, where if you have people showing up, you know, 5, 6 people at a given time pretty much all day long, you know, like you maybe have at a garage sale, but you're having that garage sale perpetually, you know, again, that's not a home occupation. And so that.
But I think that what you may have, and even in the example that we have here, I mean, if this is an antique store and they're selling old furniture and stuff, this would be a perfect place. I mean, you found the perfect spot for a home business because it exists. But in some, and this isn't between a home, it's in somebody's backyard. But this very well could be a week-long yard sale, even though it's behind a door.
Yes. Well, no, right, because again,
There's lots of parking here.
Yeah.
You know,
The-
they could handle this.
yeah, and you're right, probably the critical part of that was location. You know, it's right off of Noble and that, and had that been, if you want to say, deeper into a neighborhood, it may not have been as, the right location or been as conducive for that particular use in that. And it's the same thing, it's like a home occupation. Yeah, sometimes you're going to have maybe 2 or 3 people show up at the same time, but it's not on a regular basis or a consistent basis like you have with, you know, a typical store. You know, you don't have the open sign out there and people just pulling up in that, so, you know,
The restaurants and stuff are included in this?
No, not in the, no, because with the accessory commercial units, I put in there that,
Somebody sells Bubba's Barbecue.
right, well, no, right, because
Oh, yeah.
auto repair and service and auto detailing, those type of services would be prohibited. Manufacturing, restaurants, alcohol, tobacco, or medical marijuana sales would be prohibited. And then any of the prohibited home occupations would still be prohibited in an accessory commercial unit. And then, as I said, much like the one where we put a little paragraph to say other similar, it's the same thing with that one. Other uses that are similar to those uses or has similar intensity of uses would still not be allowed. Because again, you can't encompass everything in that. But again, it is more of an intent to have it to where it would be services and products that would be for a neighborhood area. Again, you know, somebody that bakes pies or has a garden and wants to sell their produce, or even wants to open a little thing so they can, you know, sell soda to the kids in the area.
Like a
or what.
convenience store.
Yeah, like a small convenience store type thing, right. In that, it's something that, you know, but by the nature of an accessory commercial unit, you know, because of the size limitations and that, it would never turn into a full-fledged convenience store that we see, you know, at the corner of Noble and Pine, or, you know, even down over here off of Wentz by the school, because again, you don't have that area, and even by the size limitations of the accessory ordinance, you'll never get to that size to, you know, have a full-fledged convenience store.
I personally would like to revisit this later. That's just my thought. I just don't, we don't have any this is sort of new.
I will tell.
Or so restricted in other places.
Well, no, right, because there's 2 aspects, because like I said, the accessory dwelling unit is pretty common most places across the country in that. And every,
Dwelling, yeah.
Yeah.
No problem.
No,
they're-
right. And that
they're
one-
a response to the affordable housing.
Yeah.
crisis
Yeah,
that is
right.
I've got no
prevalent.
problem with
Yeah.
that.
you can find a lot of information about that. You can find a lot of communities that have it. Like I said, there's a varying
No, but
degree.
could we continue with could we go forward with the housing
Yeah,
and not with the commercial?
definitely, because they're 2 separate sections.
And I don't mind keeping the commercial in home, but it's this new accessory structure
Yeah.
that I would like to
But I was going to say, in that
at
respect,
least think about
Yeah.
for a long time before we act on it.
because in that respect, you know, as Chris would probably know, if you read a lot of, whether it's smart towns or a lot of the verbiage on, you know, more recent planning and I guess more progressive ideas and that, there's a lot of talk about the accessory commercial units. But if you go and try to find regulations on a lot of cities, they don't exist, because there's not a
You know
whole
that
lot of
last
cities.
article you sent me, I had
Yeah.
read that previously.
Yeah,
But it looked like the illustration that they had there was a place where people lived and worked.
Perhaps, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, my 2 cents, and I'll kind of go big picture here, is, you know, I'm a big strong towns guy, but strong towns is a diverse kind of think tank of people from all perspectives and persuasions. The thing that I like about it is that it's not so much about dictating, do this, don't do that. It's more about a process, and a big part of that is getting on the ground, feet on the ground in your community, listening to people, talking to people, getting a feel for what do they want and need, what's going to make their life better. And so if a community is not ready for something, that's important.
And I
That's a-
haven't, and to be honest with you, I haven't talked to any of the city councilmen about this. I haven't
Yeah,
talked to
sure.
any of my neighbors about it.
Sure, yeah.
And honestly, when I came here tonight, I didn't come here with a strong feeling either way.
No, right, and I've said the same thing, you know, and that's, and,
But I
and,
just don't want to, I don't want to create a hornet's nest.
right,
And
Yeah, there's a lot of, understandable fears and
Yeah.
concerns, and one of the strong towns principles is no neighborhood should be free from change, because neighborhoods need to adapt and change over time in order to, be resilient to the changing conditions.
Of the world,
My
yeah.
mixed income neighborhood is doing quite well. You don't have a lot of foreclosures because there's a variety of incomes, a variety of options for people. So no neighborhood should be free from change, but no neighborhood should experience drastic change. And I think that's
Yes.
the incremental process that Strong Towns recommends. And that's going back to the way we used to build neighborhoods for a long time. But the other thing that I think is interesting is this kind of way of thinking about things brings people together who are maybe more progressive because they like to see people that can make their own goods and grow their own food and do things
Those
locally
people
and
exist,
bike and walk everywhere. But it also is kind of based on deregulation and free market economics and growing small businesses and entrepreneurship, and those are very conservative values. But I think, if ADUs are our next increment, then I would love to move in that direction and do some more research on the ACU option. But I also think it would be helpful for us to identify where are, maybe in a future land use map of what are some neighborhood commercial options that we could consider for encouraging development in our neighborhoods that are truly neighborhood commercial, so that we can have the corner stores and the bodegas that would allow us you could walk to get a gallon of milk or some eggs and maybe a little bit of produce. But, people are looking for that as an amenity to their neighborhoods, and I think it does add value to a traditional neighborhood. And so that would be my other suggestion, is that we kind of look at, in the near future, maybe what are our options for neighborhood
And
commercial?
when we are thinking along things like that, like a neighborhood market.
Yeah,
We're not wanting a 7-Eleven.
yeah, right.
We're not.
Yeah, right.
We're not wanting a sign,
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
lit up sign.
Not another gas station.
Yeah, I mean, we want, yeah. And I think that by these in-home occupations and allowing signage for that, and I think right now, if anybody wants to do something at home, we could look at broadening that too a little bit. I mean, I'm not saying now.
no, I understand, yeah.
But,
It-
like when you're talking about, I know that, and the only place I ever really remember being where I saw businesses in neighborhoods was in Eureka Springs. You'd see a house that was a real estate office. Now, it looked like one of those cool old Victorian homes, and it didn't, it had trees in the front yard and shrubs, and, it just fit right into the neighborhood. Their parking may have been in the backyard, I don't remember exactly, but those kind of things. I think that's your first step is the house, and the living, accessory. But to jump on all this at once, I'm just a little
But I think the fact that we're looking at it
hesitant.
means that we're being progressive, we're looking at it, we're looking at what other communities are doing. And I think for some, they're in places like Seattle. They're in a housing crisis, they're in a land crisis, they've run out of land.
And I think too, with the living accessory buildings too, that would give us an opportunity to see what kind of response the neighborhoods are having
Yeah.
to this.
And,
too. Because the commercial, I just think is a real shock to some people's system.
yeah, and I will say from, if you want to say my planning perspective or land use perspective, I think there is right now far more value in the accessory dwelling units for our
Yeah.
community than there is the accessory commercial units. Because I think, as I mentioned early on, or one of the first meetings we had with this, I've actually received calls where people have been wanting to put in an accessory dwelling unit for their parents who no longer can, live on their own, or kids that, whatever, but for family and all that. And so I think it's an element that will be a much greater benefit. And like I said, I've actually heard from residents that would desire to go down that road if it were in the code. In that. And just real quick, as Chris mentioned in that, one of the things even in the planning realm, and there's even articles about this, is, you have some planners that think they know it all, so to speak, and they want to do what they feel is best for the community, not what the community thinks is best for them. And I've said many a times and all along, I have obviously some experience to lend to, conversations, but at the end of the day, it's what we want as a community, in that, not what I want personally, not what, even, the commission may want personally. It's what we want as a community and how we want to, move forward with different aspects in that. And that is the critical part. And I don't disagree. I think maybe the ACUs may be a little bit of a too progressive at this point. Again, the ADUs, I think, are going to be a valuable part, and I think we are going to see people take advantage of that. And I mean that in a good way. I always say take advantage, and it sounds bad, but in a good way in that, because like I said, I've got calls. So if it is the desire to leave that out now, I think, we're probably right in that we just kind of, leave it out right now. It's something
Well,
that.
I'd like an opportunity to talk to some of the
Yeah.
council about
Yeah.
it.
And it's something we can always come back. And the same thing, it could be in a year or two or three,
Yeah, I think
it's just as we know.
worth keeping on our radar and
Yeah.
Yeah.
further research and
Because that's
discussion.
the other thing that, a lot of people, I guess, don't always maybe understand, and that is a zoning code is somewhat of a living, breathing document that should change. Because as we know, society changes, goals in a community change, desires, of different uses. We have technology, the whole realm. And so it is a document that needs to be revisited more often than not to make sure we keep up to, again, having what the community needs and desires to be a good, fulfilled community, rather than having it just sit on a shelf and say, we're not going to look at it for, 10, 15 years. So,
All right.
yeah, I was going to say, so at this point, that section, which would be the accessory commercial units, we'll just take out,
Okay,
yeah.
So for
And then the
further
accessory dwelling units will remain.
for further review.
Yeah.
Okay. Are there any other comments or questions, discussion on anything, I guess, in the zoning?
Yeah, overall, I mean, is there any other concerns, issues?
I got a question.
Sure.
Couple.
No,
You don't have anything to say?
I think I'm coming up, maybe, I don't know.
Oh, were you here? Oh, it was last night.
It was last night?
Yeah.
Oh,
I didn't even know that's
H-
Eddie Lynn.
Were you here for HP?
Yeah, he had the last item on the agenda.
so I didn't get approved.
No, you got approved. The good thing is you're approved. Sorry.
Which
Because
item,
I was sitting here, I
watched
didn't
that.
pay
I watched
attention.
that.
and he
Where
came
were
in.
you?
Yeah, he was the last item, because he has the dean's cleaners.
I got suckered
Yeah.
into buying.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
I didn't want that building, but
yeah, you got
David
approved,
wouldn't sell his houses unless I wanted it.
you got approved even though you weren't here.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
Thank you.
yeah. Sorry about that. Yeah, I didn't pay attention who it was. I'm like, oh, that's Eddie. Okay, yeah.
I was going to
yeah.
invite you up when we were done with this.
Yeah, I was happy there was public here for it, but yeah.
I'll get my days.
Okay, no problem. Thanks. Yeah, you'll be getting your certificate of appropriateness in the mail.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Okay, just a couple of things.
Yes.
For my education here. The overlay districts that are, right after this, that are listed here,
In section 6?
yeah, this is
Yeah.
just, residential accessory building overlay district.
Yes.
What about the corridors in town and, I thought we had more overlay districts than this. Do we not?
No. We have.
Remind us of what those are?
Yeah, because we basically have, well, there's one right now, which is part of the accessory structures or accessory buildings ordinance. It's the, as you indicated, it's more like a corridor area that distinguishes areas where you cannot have metal buildings, and then outside of those areas, you can have metal buildings. And that's generally 1,000 feet from the center line along Division, down off of Sooner Road. and
Is that listed in here as an overlay district?
That would fall under the, yeah, it's the,
Because all I see is two, Guthrie proper overlay and Guthrie capital town site.
the, oh,
I don't see any of the others.
oh, you know, yeah, you're, and I should have probably stated that. Since that section is under review currently, it was from you guys to the council, I haven't fully updated that section in that
Okay.
because there's been 2 or 3 kind of ping pongs back and forth. In that with the commercial as well as the accessory structures and that. And it looks like that's going to be going back to the first council meeting in October again in that. So based on that, that's going to be inserted in here. That version has that in there. It has the Sooner, the Noble, that whole corridor, you know, again, that goes on
got the-
Division. It has that, basically the accessory structures overlay, where it says in these areas, colored areas.
Out northeast.
Right, northeast, the area where you live, all that area. That's currently included in there.
Okay.
Like I said, I didn't have this fully
That's fine.
revised because it's going through.
That's fine, I just
Yeah.
wanted to make sure that.
No, right, but it will be in there
Those were
because,
included.
yeah, because then the other overlay, like you said, that is created will be the Guthrie proper overlay. That's part of that ordinance as well that will create that overlay district.
What were they called, Midtown?
Yeah, Midtown and,
But those are going back.
Division, yeah, Division, Midtown, and something else. And the 2 were basically exactly the
Division,
same.
Noble, Midtown.
Right.
Guthrie proper.
No, Guthrie proper is the new one for the architectural
Oh, that's
designs for homes, yeah.
architectural, okay.
Because the other one was, like I said, it was Midtown, Division, and Noble. Those were the 3. And that's
Right.
going to be in there and remain in that. And again, that only applies to accessory buildings.
Right.
And again, the distinction of what area you can have metal and not have
you
metal.
cannot.
Yeah, yeah, and that's in the one that's going to the council.
Okay.
And just a quick update on that, since we're in that section. It looks like what's going to happen on the commercial end is there is going to be the corridor, or at least what's going forth is the corridor where we have the Noble Avenue corridor, the historic district east to the interstate, and then division from the interstate all the way up to the historic district. Those corridors are going to require the 60% brick in that, all the other materials, 10% metal, that. Outside of that area, it will essentially be what we have now.
What we have now.
Where you can have up to 60% metal, and you can use brick or whatever, but it'll
And
be
the windows
like.
count against that.
Right, yeah. And it kind of makes sense
got no
because,
problem with that.
yeah, it kind of makes sense
Where
because
is
again,
Midtown?
the what?
Where is Midtown?
That's up and around where the high school is and up where the.
It's like from.
Walnut from Hill, from.
Yeah, the Hill
Yeah,
Division, yeah.
And it also includes anything that's not included, like, partly down to Springer, isn't it?
What?
Like around
Yes.
the temple.
Yes, around the
like
temple and Springer,
Harrison.
yep.
Well, I
It's
thought-
not in the historic
I thought the
district.
Guthrie proper is from Springer, from Noble to Springer.
It's two
all the way
different
to
things.
It's actually,
Pineville.
it's basically just the
Yeah.
northeast. Why
Right.
it's Midtown, that's a little deceiving, because
Just
it's gonna
north
be
of
like
Noble,
northeast.
north of
Right.
Noble.
But again, just,
Yeah, north of Noble, all the way
Right.
to the.
Okay.
but just to
hospital.
clarify, that's simply for the accessory buildings ordinance
Right.
in code.
has no.
Those only apply to that. The Guthrie proper is a different area in that, in some, like the Midtown area in that's in the accessory buildings is not part of the Guthrie proper overlay. Because the Guthrie proper overlay was taking in the area where we have most of our, bungalow, craftsman, Victorian, colonial type homes. As you get up into that northeast part, they're obviously more modern homes, more ranch style subdivision homes that were built, I think, probably in the 80s, 70s, in that. So that isn't included. The Midtown, though, is included, and that says no metal up in that area for an accessory building.
So even there's a lot of historic buildings there, north of Noble, all the way to College, so those are.
No, those are included in the Guthrie proper overlay.
Oh, they are?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. And that's why I said it's kind of confusing because,
It's sort of like once you get past the Dominion House.
Yes.
That area out
No-
there.
North,
You
it's not
They
included.
historically haven't had any metal accessory
Right.
buildings out there, and we're just trying
So-
to.
Right.
So they don't want metal buildings, but they also don't need the
They don't need
historic
the-
architecture.
No,
They don't need
exactly.
the historic
Because most of them are more modern homes,
Yeah.
built in the 60s, 70s, somewhere in there, in that.
Were there a few blocks on east of Division and south that were taken out of Guthrie proper, right? Because they really didn't have a lot of historic.
Yeah, on the very southern
South of
part, like you
Springer.
said,
Yeah,
yeah,
okay.
that went way down south, because originally it was down to University in that, and of course, as you know, in that area, University physically doesn't even exist in that.
And it's basically Springer
Yeah.
both sides of the
Yeah.
street, because there are.
Yeah.
historical
Okay.
ones on the-
Yeah. But yeah, Springer North now, and then between Pine and basically the historic district.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, that was the other update on that. And it seems like that is also being receptive by even the council and other members. So anyway, that's going to go on the first meeting in October. So hopefully they can approve that, and then those elements will be in place.
On the west side, Guthrie proper, is that like,
You're included.
I know, Cleveland and Oklahoma, basically?
Yes, in a little north. A little south of Noble in north, but it's more in that, of course, in the northwest area there, because
Yeah.
most of it is the Cottonwood Flats where there's
Yeah.
no development, never will be. So it takes in more of that northwest and a little bit down south.
Yeah.
But it didn't go too far down south because, again, we lose some of the elements of what we're trying to keep.
Yeah.
I have a question about in the Guthrie proper. And
Yes.
The housing,
Yes.
design. I didn't bring an example, but how, I guess, how lenient is that? I mean, I've seen some, sort of urban farm style houses, and that look like they could go in any neighborhood in Guthrie, but they don't traditionally fall under Victorian or bungalow. I would think,
And a lot of them have a metal roof. A lot of them have a metal roof.
yeah,
And the
and we
newer-
can't have metal roofs.
Which are not allowed, right?
No, they're allowed.
No, they're allowed.
Oh.
You can have metal roofs, you just
Okay.
can't have metal
Yeah.
siding,
Okay.
yeah, on a house.
I just wonder if there's some leniency there.
Yes.
Or flexibility.
Yes.
Because someone can build a really cool, sort of historic-looking home with some contemporary tweaking to it, whether it's just plate glass windows or,
No, yeah, and
you see that sort of in Aspen and different places
Yes.
with these old homes, but they built new homes that complement them, just with a more contemporary edge. And I don't know that you could classify that those houses that Elijah Morris has built as
I was just thinking. of those.
bungalow or.
no, right. And,
But they definitely
Yeah.
right,
work.
and that's why the key in that, it states that it should have basically the design or compatibility of design and architecture to that. Because you're right, we're not expecting or not going to say this has to meet a bungalow-style home to a T.
That was my question.
Yeah, there's definitely
Because when you
flexibility.
look at the
But if
picture.
it-
Right.
Yeah.
The three pictures we have, it's like, boy, that's pretty strict.
Well, yeah, and again, those are strictly examples, again, to give an idea of what we're looking for. And again, it goes back to giving an idea of, yes, your traditional subdivision home that you see nowadays is not going to work. However, You don't have to have a large, 2-story, 4,000 square foot Victorian home there in order to, qualify. It does go back to, as you indicated, the design and the architecture is what makes it. And like you said, the 2 homes that are being currently built on Division by Elijah would fit into the current code in terms of their design and architecture and the intent of of the code.
They just have, the one has the single car garage,
Yes.
the other one has the rear garage, so it's, the
Yeah.
garage is not the prominent feature, which makes.
No,
it
right,
different.
and that's when I did the code, I purposely left a lot of flexibility in there, because that's the thing, is the worst thing you can do is put very strict, stringent architectural codes, because then you pretty much get everything looks the same, and then you also have the ability, or you tend to prevent a lot of good design that you may like, but it doesn't fit, within the
Right,
code.
right.
In that. So that's why we put some basics in there to say, yeah, we still want the garages in the back. And if they are attached, we don't want them to be a prominent part of the front. We want to make sure there's a porch, because that's an important element. And again, have some architectural design on the side, but the rest is kind of up to you. If you want to build a true traditional bungalow, that's great. But if you, again, want to build something that, again, has the porch with good design and good architecture that, as Joe said, would be considered more maybe contemporary, but still has that old look, that's perfectly acceptable. It's to get away kind of from your, again, and again, nothing wrong with your traditional subdivision homes, it's just, that's probably not the area for them.
Okay. One other question, maybe one or two.
That's fine, that's why we're here.
Does this packet, this zoning, does it, is this meant to cover parking in
Yes.
residential areas?
Yes.
I don't see any place in here where it talks about recreation vehicles or trailers.
It's in section 10.
Pardon me?
In section 10, the parking.
Okay, that's fine.
Article 5,
And it may
section
just be
10.
that I didn't read it.
No, that's fine, yeah.
Or school buses, I've got a school bus in my neighborhood.
Well, it depends. If it's registered as a recreational vehicle but looks like a school bus,
yeah?
it still can be parked there.
It might be.
Yeah.
I think I saw a little kitchen inside of it.
Yeah.
Section 10.
Yeah, because section 10 is
where am I
the
gonna find
off-street automobile and vehicle parking and loading.
Okay.
But there's a couple things there.
10.6,
Yeah, there's, I was going to say, I'd have to look at the
and I may
section.
just not, probably because it was laid out like
Yeah.
this, I didn't read it.
Because it's where it talks about that you can have one recreational vehicle on your property. It has to be on the side or in the rear yard. All of that's in there. I just got to find the proper section. Because it even has,
10.12.
here, off-street parking residential property, 10.12.
10.
That also goes further to say that, and that's not, and actually, that's not changing, that's in current code. Because that's where it talks also, the vehicles parked completely in the rear of the front wall of the main building on the subject property and concealed from view from all public rights of way. You have to have a fence and all that, so you can store it on your property, but it has to be in the backyard and it has to have a view obscuring fence.
What about, okay, but
That's
this,
for a
is this,
recreational vehicle?
Yeah.
but does this imply then that you can't park a trailer or an RV on the street in front of your property?
Yeah, because that goes back to also the municipal code where, basically, if you want to say storage or long-term parking isn't allowed.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
it certainly has been.
Oh, I understand, but there's,
Or
because when you get to
the front driveway, they do that.
yeah, because, right, and that's why I was saying is, you can have a recreational vehicle, but it's supposed to be parked on the side or in the rear yard.
Can't be
No,
set in
it
your
can't be
driveway.
parked in your driveway. I mean, again, if you're going for the weekend and it happens to be there for 48 hours or
Right.
something, you're fine. But long-term, and that's why I said that's parking. Now, the actual on-street stuff in that also then goes to our basically traffic portion of our municipal code. Because the zoning kind of regulates what's on your actual property, and then the municipal code regulates what's actually on the streets, just like downtown with parking and different stuff. You can't park in a space for more than 24 hours.
Years
and-
ago, and it's not there
Yeah.
anymore. But
Yeah.
Years ago, there was a long trailer on a residential street, impacted me directly. And it was for a race car. They didn't have a garage, so they had a garage in the street on
yeah.
wheels.
Yeah,
And I complained, and they gave him a red deal.
Yeah.
And they moved it. It was a corner house, so they moved it to the front yard. And then we get another red one, they'd move it back to the side yard. I just gave up, I was like, I was
Yeah.
gonna, so.
well, and, and I understand, because it's just like me, as a lot of you know, my son races, and we have basically a race rig and a trailer, and we park it at a storage unit. I pay every month to have it parked at a storage unit, so, it's off the street, and I have nowhere on my yard, and honestly, I wouldn't really want to park it in my yard and all of that, and so a lot of times when you have that stuff, it's like, you almost have to go the next step of saying, okay, I need to,
That's gonna be part of the price.
That's,
Admission.
no, exactly. It's kind of part of the whole thing is, that's really not something that should be,
But it was
obviously
like
we
having-
have the car in our garage and
It was
that.
like having a
but, yeah.
semi-trailer.
Yeah.
On your
Yeah.
street.
No,
all the
right.
time.
Yeah, no, I
And it
understand.
never moved.
Yeah.
It would leave twice the 2 weekends.
So
a
what,
year.
what are the current rules about yard parking for?
It has to
Leon,
be-
where's that in here?
That's on the, that's also off-street parking residential property.
So you don't have to have a paved driveway?
No, you do.
Oh.
Because if you look at 10.12A, it says on there that any shall park or allow parking of any motor vehicle or trailer upon a resident in the city except on the surface.
There it is.
Yeah,
So there-
so it basically says you can't park anywhere except if it's on a sealed surface
It's not on
pavement.
that page.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then it goes further to say
Oh.
if you're going to store it,
Section is that?
yeah. Oh, 10.12.
1, 2?
10.12.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah, so that's a code enforcement issue, right?
Yes.
If they're parking in
Yeah.
the garage.
Yeah, and we get a lot of those, and and because of that, we take care. There's also the other part of the code, I forget, I think it's section 7. Section 7 is more specific to what Joe was talking about. It's storage and parking of trailers, recreation vehicles, and commercial vehicles. And that's where it says that not more than one commercial vehicle which does not exceed 1.5 tons rated capacity can be parked at your house. So even if you have, if you're, like somewhere you have an HVAC company or some of those, and they may have a, 3/4 ton or even a dually truck and that, they can still park that in their
Right,
driveway.
right.
But as you said, if you have a true semi-big rig, no, that can't be parked, at your house or that. And that's where it also talks about the recreational vehicle, that you can have no more than one in that, and it can't exceed 32 feet in length. And, it has to be in the side or rear yard, and that.
It has to be paid.
Right. Yes, exactly. And it has to be paved. If it's in the rear yard and it's concealed with a fence, you don't necessarily have to have it paved. But if you put it on the side of your house and it's not view obscuring, yes, it has to have a solid,
That makes sense.
yeah, sealed surface. And it also has the provision in there, for instance, again, if you happen to go, maybe you do have it at a storage unit most of the time, and you went out on the weekend and you come home on Sunday and or even getting ready and it's sitting there Friday and it sits there for a day or two before you take it somewhere, that's allowed by code. You just can't store it, And that's where the 48-hour provision is in there, where it gives you a couple days to have it parked at your house in the front
Right,
driveway.
right.
Yeah.
So it's not just left there.
No, exactly. Yeah, but
Same
again.
thing with a
U-Haul.
car though, right?
Yeah, or U-Haul or any of that,
Or even a
yeah.
car.
Yeah, no, right.
You can't
Yeah.
leave a parked in the street for more than 48 hours without moving it. Is that?
No, a car is different, because we're talking big vehicles. You can park a car in the street and continually park it.
Indefinitely?
Yes,
As long as it's tagged?
yes, as long as it's an operable vehicle, which
We
means it
park
can't
in
have any
front of our
flat
house.
tires, it has to have current tags, that type of
right.
thing.
We park in front of our house mainly because we like coming in the front door, it's more neighborly, but also I can look out my bedroom window if something goes down and I can see
And
my
you can see your
cars.
car.
Yeah, and that's why I said that's allowed. It gets where you're, again, talking about commercial vehicles like, semis
You can
and
tell
large
when they don't
trailers
move
and
when
that.
The grass
Yeah.
starts growing up
Yeah.
around them.
Yeah,
But a lot
because
of
the same thing, you
Yeah,
can't take
yeah.
your enclosed trailer and unhook it and park it in the street. You know, it's either gotta be in your yard or somewhere else. But again, a car you can park on the street and there's no limitation.
And then a total jump.
Yeah?
The landscaping is pretty much staying the same.
Yes, yes. I did not tweak that much because I don't think there's all that much, I guess, wrong with it. The one thing that I did add that you'll see in there, and I think we talked about this, is the element of the buffer yards in that for commercial developments where there's going to have to be a little bit more landscaping or separation when there's commercial to residential in that. But for the most part, it was left pretty much as is.
And you know, when the new convenience store on the west side,
G-Mart?
yes, we were, I just know that they were presented with a pretty, what is it, firm hand, there was a firm hand on what kind of building was gonna go there, and because there were a lot of neighbors, homeowners on that block, particularly on the Noble part, that were concerned about having it there. And I just remember that they were supposed to have shrubs planted
Yeah.
next to the parking lot, facing those homes to soften.
Yeah,
That never happened.
yeah. And,
It never happened.
No,
They did put some trees in.
yeah. And that's why I was saying the one section that I created was buffer yards, and it's kind of that.
Buffer yards are good.
Yeah, that same concept. So when there's a multifamily that abuts a single family, or even mixed-use commercial in that abuts a residential area, there'll have to be some upgraded buffering techniques take place, both in landscaping as well as separation of distance in that to be put in there. So that was the biggest change in that. The other thing that got changed was, if you remember Meridian Tech, when they came in and wanted river rock instead of mulch, the one section that mandated biodegradable mulch and that was it, I changed it to say it could be mulch, river rock, or similar type materials in that, which I think is appropriate. But basically, those are the only two aspects of the landscaping, current landscaping ordinance that changed.
And I guess, on the subject of G-Mart, they have a lot of signage in their windows, the stick-on stuff. That's currently allowed?
You know what the problem with that was? It's screening.
Yeah.
It's their.
Yeah, it's like a way of tinting.
It's their tinting. It's sort of like what, the problem with that is, I don't know. Yeah,
I don't have a
hate it.
major
I
problem with
hated
it, but
First of all, I've read that the key to not being robbed in those convenience store is being visible from the
Yeah.
street, and they're not.
yeah.
To answer your question, covering entire window, no, that's not even allowed by current
Yeah,
code.
but they're, what's the word? You can see through them. Sort of like
Doesn't
what-
matter.
It's
If
sort of
it's-
like what Boomerang had.
Right, but they also changed theirs, because they have theirs where the advertisement is now limited. The actual, like
but
you
that-
said, kind of screening or the,
Even not in the historic district? They can't use screening that,
as long as it doesn't have advertising on it, because
It's all
the
advertising.
whole-
but that's what I mean. Even by
Even the
current
front
code, you're
doors
only
have
allowed
it.
50% of a
That
window.
would be really nice to get
Yeah.
that changed.
In the historic district, you're only
It's
allowed
like
up
beer
to.
bottles.
Right. In the historic district, you're allowed a third of a window. In everywhere else, you're allowed 50% of a window, which is pretty standard for most communities.
Theirs is 100%.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And of course, a lot of that is just like everything,
Right.
code enforcement.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
but like I said, by code, even current code, it's 50%, and that's not changing.
Didn't
Yeah.
know that.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. I think that's every question that I had. See what happens when I read all your material?
That's good. I'm glad you did.
Yep.
No, that's what it's
See if
for. I'm
there's
glad.
Anything else? I think that's it.
Oh, one last thing I was gonna let you know, because again, when I got, if you want to say thinking about stuff, which, is always dangerous with a lot of people, but under the temporary use permits, I don't know if you noticed, but initially, it had just, you require a temporary use permit if you're gonna do retail sales of products and et cetera, and all of that. Well, one of the things when I was thinking, I'm like, well, we should the intent of the temporary use permit section was more for bigger events or long-term use of a temporary, where they're maybe there for 2, 3, 4 weeks. And so what I did is put a time stipulation, basically saying, 70, I think it's 48 or 72 hours. I don't remember what I put. But basically what I didn't want to prevent and I didn't want to over-regulate is when somebody pulls up to, you see it all the time at Dollar General, their trailer of watermelons and they're selling.
Yeah.
I don't want them to have to get a temporary use permit every time they pull in, because they're usually there for 24 hours or maybe a weekend in that. So I changed it to say 48 hours or anything that would be longer than 48 hours, or I might even put 72 hours. So again, we don't have to worry about them technically having to get a permit, because again, I think that's over regulatory, and I think that's a good thing to have in a community where people can pull into a parking lot without having to get a permit and sell watermelons or whatever they, produce they want in
Trump
that.
flags or.
Well, no, right, and most.
I was just thinking of.
Well, yeah, and like you said, if
Because they
it,
don't have to get
yeah,
a permit, do they?
we have the
Go off
ability
route.
if they, per the code, we have the ability if they get a little too aggressive in
Yeah,
that,
like if they're here too long.
They weren't here
too
that
long, or
No,
like you
they're
said, they're
Edmond.
starting to,
They've been here twice.
yeah.
And they have lights and stuff at night.
And-
too. It's kind of like a fireworks stand.
Yeah, and that's why I said if it's for, 28, 48 hours, I don't think it's that big a
Yeah,
deal.
I agree.
But like you said, if they're starting to camp out more, then yes, you're gonna need to get a temporary use permit, because we're going to probably say, okay, the signage is gonna, the light, whatever.
Like if a
and that.
food truck comes and sets up.
No, right. And like I said, I don't want to over-regulate that, because it's a good aspect on, for our community and people in our community in that. And the same thing, a lot of times those people probably wouldn't even realize they need one, and it's just not worth, chasing down, so to speak, because again, the intent was for larger, as I said, an example I use is if you're going to have, the Mumford & Sons at the drive-in versus on city property. Have a permit process for that, so public safety and all of those are aware and can get in on the conversation and get everything taken out. It's not there to, again, over-regulate the average person who wants to sit at a corner for, a day or two. Yeah.
What about the garage sales?
The garage sales exist in the code and are separate, yeah. They still would be just as they are now, where you get a garage permit, and I think you're allowed one per quarter or something like that. Yeah, that's in the municipal code, and that'll remain, that's not gonna change. This is more, again, for, again, even like if somebody wants to set up in the downtown and on somebody's property, and one example I used is where the cars are now, but if somebody wanted to set up for, let's say, 3 or 4 weeks there, and sell wreaths during Christmas or something. This is a way to permit it, right, to say, yeah, we don't have a problem with that, and it gives security to both ends. We're aware of it, but they also have a piece of paper that says, yes, I can be here and I can be doing this, so if somebody questions it in that. So again, it's not meant to be over-regulatory, it's just to help give some understanding and an ability even for those people to have a mechanism to say, I have a permit and I can do what I'm doing.
But the food trucks are also considered that they just.
Yeah, again, if a food truck wanted to come in and sit on a property for, let's say, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks or a couple months.
That doesn't require no permit whatsoever.
Well, it would now in that long term. If they just want to come in for a weekend, yeah, no, it doesn't.
What times they just pull up to a parking space
That food
for
truck come up here.
They can do that. And even with the updated zoning code, they can still do that.
So my question is, if the food truck is allowed to come up there and
Mm-hmm.
do that, and don't you think that's taking business from the restaurants, that they are actually paying taxes?
No, they're paying taxes because they have to get a solicitor's permit, because anytime that you do any sales in the city, you get a solicitor's permit through the city clerk's office. So now I can't say that every one of them do it, but most of them that do, because even the ones that set up a lot of times with the tents, with the phones and that, and just like the fireworks, when they set up, they all get a solicitor's permit to be able to do that. What this does is take it to the kind of the next step to where we have another ability to review. But kind of going back to answer, the zoning code does not regulate competition in that. So, you know, in a city in general doesn't regulate competition in that. So, you know, we can't say, well, you know, we already have 4 antique shops, so you want to come in and put an antique shop. No, we're not going to allow you because we think you have too much. We you know, you can't and don't regulate competition. And that's kind of what that comes back to.
State does that.
Yeah, really. Yeah, so true. There's other mechanisms that, yeah, but anyway.
Oh, you
yeah.
want another nursing home there? Oh, no, you can't do that.
But they, like I said, they do have, you know, again, some local regulatory, it's just not going to be through a temporary use permit.
All right, do we need to vote?
Yes,
anything?
because now if everybody's good, I need an actual formal recommendation. So like I said, then I can move this on to start the same process with the city council.
So I make a motion to approve with the removal of the commercial.
The ACUs?
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
I'll get the acronym down eventually. Yeah, with just that exception.
Okay,
I will second.
okay. Joe Chap?
And to make sure that we get all the overlays back in the.
Yes, and like I said, that in the actual version that will be published is there, because again, that's going to the council under a separate
There's
ordinance.
been so many versions, I can see how easy it would be.
I know, and that's why I quit updating it in here. I'm like, I'll wait till it's approved and then I'll just
And
put
I
it in
guess
there.
we'll get a
Yes.
final version.
Yes, you will.
That'd be great.
Yes, yes. All right, Joe Chappell,
Yes.
Abe Gassenpour,
Yes.
and Chris Bryant.
Yes,
Thanks for your work.
yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you, guys. I really appreciate all your, you know, review and input in that. So, yeah, it'll be a good thing for the community. It'll help update some things.
Okay, staff comments?
None.
All right, commissioner comments?
None.
All right, and with that, we're adjourned.